Okay, so we began our discussion, which I'd like to sort of complete on Daf Ayin Dalet and Beis, about the concept of onus. And that means that a person normally would apply pikuach nefesh, and he would be allowed to violate the Torah to save his life, but under certain conditions, the Torah says that there's no pikuach nefesh, and v'chai b'hem does not apply. And that would apply, for example, in the Gimel Averos Chamuros, and in other Averos, b'shas hashmad or b'farhesia. And then we apply the principle of Yehoreg v'al yavar. Now he went ahead and he violated the Torah. And the question is whether or not we should apply the principle of ones, and therefore he doesn't get punished, or since he had the choice and the Torah obligated him to make the decision that he would not violate the Torah, he should be liable and punished for violating the Torah. And we've said many, many times, and it bears repetition, that here we should differentiate between the various categories that we mentioned earlier when the Torah suspends v'chai b'hem and pikuach nefesh. In the case of Gimel Averos Chamuros, where the Torah says there's no v'chai b'hem and there's no pikuach nefesh, that's a result of the chumras havera, the severity of the avera, and there's no pikuach nefesh. There's no v'chai b'hem. The Torah will not allow v'chai b'hem to override these three mitzvos chamuros. However, with regard to the other categories of Yehoreg v'al yavar, namely other averos b'shas hashmad or b'farhesia, we could say that fundamentally there is v'chai b'hem, there is pikuach nefesh. We're not dealing with an avera chamura, but nevertheless we have a mitzvah of Kiddush HaShem. But as far as the v'chai b'hem and the avera, as far as the etzem avera itself, and inherently there's no difference between this avera b'farhesia or b'shas hashmad and the avera b'tzina and shalom b'shas hashmad. In both cases, the Torah says v'chai b'hem. Just the difference is in terms of Kiddush HaShem. So therefore, once we go beyond the Gimel Averos Chamuros into Shar Averos, we have v'chai b'hem. And that's pikuach nefesh, that's mata the lav. Again, he might be in violation of, he will be in violation of the mitzvah of Kiddush HaShem, but we don't put a person to death based on the violation of Kiddush HaShem. We don't even give him malchus for non-fulfillment of a mitzvah saseh. And as far as the avera that he violated, we could apply the principle of ones to mitigate any punishment, but we have pikuach nefesh, and that's going to override and be docha the lav. What are we left with? We're left with Kiddush HaShem. Now, here's where we want to perhaps differentiate between avodah zarah in the category of the Gimel Averos Chamuros. Let's break it down into two categories. We're going to leave out Gili Arayis for a moment. Let's just focus our attention on avodah zarah, on Ritzicha and on avodah zarah. And in both cases, he has to give up his life rather than kill somebody else or worship avodah zarah. We could suggest the following, that with regard to avodah zarah, the Torah is saying that avodah zarah is such a severe violation that there's no v'chai b'hem. That the halacha pikuach nefesh could not override the iser chomer, the avera chamur of avodah zarah. But with regard to ritzicha, we have a different halacha entirely. and that is that it's your v'chai b'hem against his v'chai b'hem. We pit one life against the other, and we cannot make a decision and tip the scale in favor of one or the other. I guess you'd say in democratic terms, we're all equal in the eyes of the law. So you do have a chai b'hem, you have a right to live, no less than he has a right to live. So what's the halacha? My chazis. The Gemara says it's a svar. We have no pasuk here. It's not like in the case of Avodah Zarah where the Torah says v'ahavta etc. b'chol nafshecha afilu notelos nafshecha. We don't have such halacha with regard to ritzicha. We just have my chazis. Who says your blood is redder than his? Therefore, you can't take life into your own hands and decide, well, I'm going to make the decision which of the two nefashos has a greater right to live. No. There's no such thing. So therefore, we could say that in the case of ritzicha, basically what we have is a stalemate. We just don't know how and what gives me the ability to apply v'chai b'hem. Which v'chai b'hem are you going to apply? Reuven is being forced at gunpoint to kill Shimon. If he refuses to do so, Reuven will die. Which v'chai b'hem takes precedence? There's no way of knowing. That's called my chazis. In the Gemara's language, that's my chazis. So at the end of the day, in practical terms, you are not going to apply v'chai b'hem and pikuach nefesh to override the isa of ritzicha. So there is no v'chai b'hem to be matir ritzicha. But why not? Because of his v'chai b'hem. Now we get to Gilui Arayos. Here's where the going gets rough. There is no pasuk, there's no drasha or yalfusa in the parsha of Gilui Arayos that says that it's an avera chamur b'chol nafshecha, you have to give up your life rather than violate Gilui Arayos. There is no such pasuk. We only have an equation to ritzicha. And the Gemara says here on Daf Ayin Daled, Ma rotzech yehorg vel yavar, af nara murasa tehorg vel tavla. Very strange. I mean, I understand the yehorg vel yavar in ritzicha because my chazis. But what other parallel svara can I find in Gilui Arayos? In Avodah Zarah, I understand the Torah said we suspend v'chai b'hem. The aver is chamura, and there's no v'chai b'hem. But in the case of Gilui Arayos, we have no source or indication that there's no v'chai b'hem. You only have an equation to ritzicha, and from ritzicha we're going to derive the din of Yeharg Val Yavar in Gilui Arayos. But it's like min b'sheino mino, if you're familiar with that phrase. You're comparing oranges and apples. They're two different species. In Ritzicha, you have my chazis. There is no parallel in Gilui Arayos of my chazis. Okay. But again, and keep in mind that at the end of the day, we derive from the equation, the analogy between Gili Arayis and Ritzicha, that there's no Pikuach Nefesh to be docha. Just like in Ritzicha, Pikuach Nefesh doesn't have the power to override. So the same thing applies to Gili Arayis, that the V'chai Bahem and the Pikuach Nefesh is not going to override the Iser of Gili Arayis. Even though, again, the Svar of my Chazis doesn't seem to have any parallel in Gili Arayis, but the Hekesh is there, the equation is there, and we derive the halach of Yeharg Val Yavar from Ritzicha to Gili Arayis. Now, if you recall, but I want to review this because we're coming close to the end of the sugi, but I want to review this. We had 3 shitos in the Rishonim, a 3-way machlokes, regarding a situation in which the Torah requires you to give up your life, Yeharg Val Yavra, you fail to do so. And the question is whether we punish you and you're liable for the same onshim, or can we apply the principle of onus, meaning you didn't do it out of your own will, you only did it to save your life, and whether or not you're punished for it. So the Rambam says quite clearly in Perikei Milchus Yisodi HaTorah Lachad Daled, we've read it many, many times, Kol Misha Nemer Bo Yeharg Val Yavar, V'lo Nerag Hareza Mechalas HaShem, V'afal Pichen Mipnei Sha'ovar B'ones, Ein Malkin Oso, Ein Tzorch Lomer Shem Mimisen Oso, Shenemar V'nasati Ponai B'ishahu, Mipi HaShmuel Lomdu, Hahu V'lo Ones. So the Rambam applies the category of ones to a person who was required, according to law, in Yeharg Val Yavar to give up his life. He did not do so, but under the pain of death, he violated the Torah, no punishment. He's considered an onus. And the case of Mishnah quotes the Ramach. Again, I'm just reviewing what we did. Rav Moshe Cohen, the Ramach, that whenever the Torah says Yeharg Val Yavar v'orav v'lo nerag, bezdim emisan also. Imagine from one extreme to the other. And in the middle, we had a compromised shita. And that is Rabbeinu David. And he differentiates between Gimel Averos Chamuros. There the din is Nerag, he will be put to death. But in Shar Averos, B'Shas Hashmad or B'Far Hesia, we're not going to punish him. He's pot. Now, Rav Soloveitchik has a fundamental distinction between what's called a matir and onus. So again, if I had a whiteboard here, I would write those 2 words on the board. If you want to write it down, jot it down. Matir and onus. He says that pikuach nefesh is a matir. And the Torah is saying, under certain conditions, v'chai bohem, and it allows you and permits you to override an avera in the Torah. That's called a matir. But we have another halacha, and that I would call it a hyphenated ones / hoter. That means that in situations of ones, under duress, the Torah says you're potter. And it doesn't necessarily mean that it's mutter. There are situations in ones where it's not mutter. But ones per se is a poter and exempts you from liability from punishment. And the Rav says the following: Gimel Averos Leka Din Matir de Pikuach Nefesh. What's unique about the three Averos Chamuros is that the Torah undermines the Matir of Pikuach Nefesh. But would the Ptur of Ones be Chal? Says the Rambam, yes. With regard to Gidibel Averes Chamus, we suspend the halacha of Matir, but we still have the halacha of Ptur. There's no Matir of Pikuach Nefesh, but the Ptur of Ones still applies. And the reason for that is apparently because the Maisa was a Maisa Ba'ones. And the Ptur of Ones, meaning whenever a Maisa is done Ba'ones, there's a Ptur of Onshim, that applies. We're not dealing with Matir or Asa. We're defining the essence of the Maisa Aver. There's a Maisa Aver B'Ratzon, even B'Shogeg, and then there's a Maisa Aver Ba'ones. And the Ones is a poter, which exempts him from onshim, from punishments. But that should not be confused, argues the Rambam, with the issue of pikuach nefesh, which is an issue of matir. And whether or not I'm going to allow him and permit him in the matir, that's irrelevant to the nature of the Maisa Vera. The Maisa Vera was done ba'ones. And a Maisa Vera ba'ones does not generate a punishment. Ask yourself another question. Was he allowed to do what he did? And the answer is in the Gimel Averes Chamuros, the Torah suspends v'chai b'hem, and there's no matir. Okay, but now we get to the Avera. Should we punish him or not? We need a Maisa Avera. In halacha of Maisa Avera, there's a din of matir, of poter, which is called ones. As far as the onshim is concerned, he was onus, he didn't do it willingly, and therefore he's exempt from punishment. He's alleviated from malchus or misa, the punishment. Comes along the Ramach, quoted by the Kesef Mishnah and Perkei, and he says, no, there's no ptur of ones if the Torah says Yehoreg v'al Yava. What does that mean? The Torah says Yehoreg v'al Yava. The Torah is talking to him, addressing him, and requiring him to give up his life. That removes the matir and the law of onus. The whole distinction that the Rama makes between the matir of pikuach nefesh as opposed to the onus is irrelevant to the Rama. Once you mafkia the matir and it becomes asur, then the Torah is saying there's no onus over here. You made that decision and you preferred to live rather than to die, even at the expense of violating the Avera, you will be punished. That's the sheet of the Ramah. However, there's one exception to the rule of the Ramah, and that's a case where the anos machricho begufo, and that's called karka olam or shevi altas. When the Avera was looking for a word in English, the action was done by someone else, and you were just simply a passive victim without any participation in the action, that's a different kind of an onus. And that's a level of onus that even Rav Moshe, even Ramach would agree is poter, despite the Ehar Gval. Because that becomes like V'lanarol Osasa Davar. That's an onus of Shevi Altasa without any Maisa Vera. So the Ramach is free to say that in certain situations, the Torah removes the onus and considers it as your Maisa Vera, but if you're not active at all, it's not your decision to violate the Avera in order to save your life, which makes it into a Maisa Avera that's punishable. But rather, there's an ones gomur in which the Maisa is done to your body, and there's no punishment. So again, if he does the Avera actively because he's afraid to die, then according to the Ramach, there's no onus. But if the action was done to him, he's a victim, like the case of rape, then that's not even a Maisa Avera at all. That's the most extreme onus, and we don't punish it. And finally, we have the third sheet, and that's Rabbeinu David. He rejects Rav Ramach, and therefore, in Shara Veros Befarhesia, even though he violated them actively, meaning he had a choice and he had a decision, and he made the decision that his life is more important. So he violated an Avera Kala Befarhesia, Machmas Pached Mavis. According to Ramach, he would be punished because he did it b'kuv vaseh, and the Torah required him to give up his life. The Ramach says he's potter. In the case of Gimel Averis Chamuros, the Ramach says, the Rabbeinu David says, like the Ramach, that he's chayiv misa. But in Shara Aveis Befarhesia B'shas Hashmad, he's potter. Even though the Torah required him to give up his life, Yehar Gval. And l'chora, it makes no sense. Because if in Shara Veis Farhesi Rabbeinu David is willing to apply the P'tur of Ones, even though it was Kum Vaseh, and therefore he's not liable for any punishment, why is he liable for punishment in the Gimel Averis Chamuras? Why not apply the principle of Ones? So the Rav, Zichron V'Racha, comes up with a very new idea in order to explain Rabbeinu David. That the P'tur of Ones, which we call a P'tur, only applies when there's a heter of Pikuach Nefesh. That there's an interdependence between these two categories that we've been working so hard to differentiate, between the P'tur of Ones and the question of matir or asur pikuach nefesh. Says Rabbeinu David, the Ptur of Ones can only apply when there's a Heter Pikuach Nefesh. I don't understand why, but it's just a mathematical conclusion. So in Gimel Averes Chamuros, we said that there's no Mater V'chai, no Heter Pikuach Nefesh, because of the Chumas Avera. Comes along Rabbeinu David, he says that if the Chomer HaIser is so severe that there's no Pikuach Nefesh, then there's no Ptur of Onus. And therefore, according to Rabbeinu David, if he violates the Gimel, any of the Gimel Averes Chamuros, he's Chayav Misa. But in Shar Averes B'far Hesya, there's a Mater Pikuach Nefesh, and therefore there's a Chalos Ptur of Onus. He has a chiyuv to be Moser Nafsho Midin Mitzvahs Kiddush HaShem, but if he violated in Shari Sur B'far Hesi, he's not going to be punished. And there's going to be a Chalos Ptur Onus. Okay, then, so that's where we'll. I'm sorry that we started late today. That was my mistake. But I'll make a note of where we got up to. So if I understand correctly, tomorrow only John is with us. So I don't know, I'm not sure what my policy should be, so to speak.